This is now the second series we are doing. We started in 2020, where we had Chardonnay and Pinot Noir on a session and Gunnar Wedliner. This time it's today Blaufränkisch on 2 sessions, and tomorrow with Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Normally, when we do master classes, it's more about the smell and taste of the wine and what we have in the glass. And as we serve most of the time the wines blind, the people try to find out which grape, where it is coming from, how old it is. Today, we look beyond the smell and taste of wines. And we would like to share some information on the fundamental info about grape varieties. And this is, of course, scientific work. This is always in progress. José will present all the information which is public so far, but obviously there are in many areas in Austria, but abroad as well, research going on, and it's a work in progress. And science is always a debate, and we are quite happy about the big audience today. We have for all the seminars 259 participants, and from 20 countries. We have 5 masters of wines, a lot of winemakers, journalists from 16 different countries, and as well as wine connoisseurs and collectors. So a bright group and a wide group, and a lot of interesting people. Maybe you can ask questions as well, would be much appreciated. And I'm quite happy that we have Johannes Friedberger from the Federal College and Institute of Viticulture and Pomology from Klosterneuburg in the seminar as well. And as we know that he's participating, we asked him after José's presentation to put some comments on his studies as well. And please, I think we already have put all your microphones on mute, because I can mute you, I cannot unmute you. If you would like to ask a question, you need to unmute, but as long as you don't speak, please keep the microphones mute. And be aware we are recording the session and put it on our website, that afterwards you can have a look at a replay function and can replay what was brought today. We're not using it for any marketing purpose, but please be aware that maybe your small picture will be seen there. So far, the introduction word. José, I would like to hand over to you and to your presentation on Blaufränkisch.
Thank you very much, Ben, for this nice introduction. Thank you, May Wines, for having me in this seminar. Thank you, Brigitte Rina, for helping setting this up. I'm very happy to see all these people online. I would love to share a glass of Blaufränkisch with you, but for the moment we will do it as a webinar. And I'm really excited to speak about this grape with you. I'm sharing my screen. I hope that everyone sees it. Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay. We can see it quite good.
Okay, excellent. So we can start. So Blaufränkisch for May Wines. I will start by asking a simple question before we speak about Blaufränkisch. Asking a very simple question with a not simple answer. What is a grape variety? You will see that it could be tricky. Then we go to Blaufränkisch, its worldwide distribution, and then I will attack the subject of its origin and its history. So, and first of all, also some advertisement. If you are interested in knowing more about Blaufränkisch, as well as all the grape varieties that are cultivated in the world, I'm happy to suggest you to look up in our book, Wine Grapes, that was published in 2012. It has information about all the grape varieties. It's not up to date, it's 10 years old now, and some new research are not in the book. For example, the parentage of Blaufränkisch, but nevertheless, you can find a lot of information in that book. So what is a grape variety? If you ask any wine grower or winemaker, what is Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc? They will answer these are 3 different varieties, because the wines that they make are completely different. Of course, from a practical point of view, they look different in the vineyard by the color, and of course they give a different type of wine because they are made in different styles. But for the ampelographer, they are one and the same variety. I will show you what. What is a grape variety? We can ask the question differently. How does a new grape cultivar appear? Well, you must know that at the beginning of any grape variety, any grape cultivar, you have one single seed, one grape pip. These grape seeds must grow into a young plant. This young plant must not be pulled out by the wine grower. It must be kept alive for a few years for the plant to produce berries, and then the grower must say, oh, I like this vine a lot. The berries are very good. I make good wine out of it. So I want more of them. He needs to multiply them. This is vegetative propagation. He can do it through cuttings, as you see here. Just you cut a branch and you plant it. So you have the buds underground that can grow roots, and the upper part can grow leaves, etc. Or layering. Directly from the plant, you bend the branch in the soil and you have roots growing and the plant going up. Then you can cut the connection or not. It depends. What you're doing here is vegetative propagation. So far, you have not made any sexual reproduction with this variety, so it remains the same. And what we are doing here is exactly cloning, because every time you multiply a plant by cutting or layering, you have the risk or the chances to have mutations in the DNA. The vast majority of mutations have no effect that we can observe on the plant, but some mutations have spectacular effects, like the color of the berry. Of course, it's spectacular. The size of the cluster, some hairy, some small white hairs underneath the leaves, the shape of the leaves, and so on. So these spectacular effects are put aside by human beings, saying this is a different clone. So the concept of clone is quite subjective, because it only depends on what we can observe in the vineyard. And the totality of the clones is the grape cultivar. So grape variety consists of a large number of clones of the same grape variety. And the older the variety is, the higher is the number of clones. So if we go back to this question, Pinot Noir is the original grape. I call it Pinot, no color adjective. Pinot Noir mutated into Pinot Gris on the left. It happened many times, and mutated also into Pinot Blanc. I could even add another arrow, because we have observed Pinot Gris becoming Pinot Blanc recently. So these are only changes in the DNA, where the DNA is responsible for the color. All the rest of the DNA is the same. So this is one and the same variety. Same happens for Sauvignon Blanc, which is Traminer in German-speaking countries. Sauvignon Blanc mutated into Sauvignon Rose, which is Traminer Rot. And another mutation, this one is more aromatic, gave Traminer Aromatico or Gewürztraminer. But at the starting point, you have one single variety that had accidents in its life, but still it's one and the same variety. If you don't believe me, look at these Pinot pictures. On the left, you have Pinot Noir with what we call sectorial chimeras. So these are mutations. Depending on where in the growth of the cluster the mutation occurs, you can have half of the cluster that is white, half that is red, or even if you look closer, half of the berry that is white, half of the berry that is red. The same happened with Pinot Gris. So will you tell me that we have two different grape varieties in the same cluster? No, this is not possible. This is one and the same variety with accidents. So why do I mention this? I do not like hearing or reading all the time the expression the Pinot family. No, it is not the Pinot family. It is Pinot, tout court, as we say in French. And Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Meunier. Beware the French in Champagne, they are trying to make people think or believe that Pinot Meunier is simply Meunier and is a distinct variety. It's not. It is a Pinot, like Freyburgunder, it's early ripening. Teinturier has a red color inside. All of them have the same DNA, except at these precise locations for the color or for the ripeness, etc. It's one and the same variety. I call it Pinot, and it's not a family. Okay. This happened also in other grape varieties. Recently, in the 2008, I think, it was observed on Tempranillo. The picture is not so good, but here you have on the same vine a branch of regular Tempranillo with red berries, and here a mutation occurred in this branch, and all this branch produced white Tempranillo. Happened the same in Australia with Cabernet Sauvignon, original with blackberries, of course, white version called Malian, and the pink berried version called Chalistin. And I could name many other examples. Many old varieties have these kind of mutations. So the definition of a grape variety, a clone, it is a clone or a series of related clones propagated vegetatively from a single parent plant developed from a single seed. So don't forget that to have a seed, you always need to have a parent. It works like with human beings. And to have a seed, you have different ways to obtain it. It can be spontaneous. These are the native grape varieties, or this could be made by human hand. These are controlled grape breeding. We call them crossings or hybrids. So if you look on the left, what happens in the majority of varieties is selfing. Here you have the flower of grape, and you have the male part, the stamen here with the pollen, and this is the female part. Most of the time, the own pollen of the same flower goes on the female part, and it produces a berry and a seed. This is called selfing. We are lucky that it is possible in grape varieties. Otherwise, we would have to pollinate all the grape flowers all the time, and harvest would be much more difficult to obtain every year. So this is probably 99% of the cases, or 98%. If you go below, you can have cross-pollination also with native grape varieties by nature, either by insects or by wind. An insect or the wind takes the pollen from one flower and brings it to another flower, possibly another variety, and then you can have natural, spontaneous new varieties. With crossing, you take, usually it's a bit more complicated, but you take a small brush and you take the pollen from one plant and you transport it by hand on the female part of another plant, and you can control, you can choose which is the mother, which is the father. If you remain within Vitis vinifera, within the European grape, we call them crossings. Like Müller-Thurgau is a crossing. If you take the pollen of Vitis vinifera and you put it on a non-vinifera female or the opposite, we call it hybrids, because we don't stay within the same species. So that's how it's working. And we need very often DNA profiling to understand more what's going on in ampelography. Ampelography is the science that describes the grape. Ampelos is vine, graphine is description, to describe in Greek. So the description goes with the shape of the leaves, the angles between the nerves, the teeth, etc. A lot of measurements that can be done. But this greatly depends on the development stage of the plant. Sometimes you need to wait for the plant to grow a few years to have berries and to have mature adult leaves to really be able to observe. And the sanitary state of the plant. Here you have two pictures, one that is sound, one that has a virus, and these two are Nebbiolo. On the left, you have Nebbiolo, what we call Nebbiolo lampia, which is the main biotype of Nebbiolo. And on the right, you have Nebbiolo Miquette, which many professionals thought that it was a different variety. But we observed that it has a virus that gives its bizarre shape. We treated against the virus and it went back to this original shape. And finally, we have around 10,000 grape varieties in the world, including table grapes, grapes for resin, etc. So there are limits of ampelography. No one can visually identify all the grape varieties in the world. So DNA profiling is helping a lot. How does it work? So DNA profiling is based on PCR. Nowadays, everybody knows what PCR is, thanks to COVID. Maybe one positive thing about that, people understand how a PCR is working. So what we're doing is almost the same as we're doing with the nose samples, but we take, most often we take leaf samples, plant tissue, we make a juice with them, we extract the DNA, then we have this machine to make the PCR and to read what we have amplified. So the PCR is there to amplify one portion of the DNA that we have chosen. And then you have here, for example, I gave Nebbiolo Lampia, I was speaking about before. If you look at one region, you can see two peaks like this, each corresponding to the same region on two different chromosomes. That's why we have two values. And for example, Nebbiolo Rosé, which is a different variety, has different peaks. So basically, that's how we proceed for DNA profiling. And what we do is more or less creating a barcode for every grape variety. Barcodes like you have in supermarket on the items that you're buying, you have a barcode, so that's what we're doing. I always take an example of human individual that you need to identify. Let's say you have a criminal, you have a blood stain or hair or semen or whatever human part that you can extract DNA from. So you will extract the DNA. You look at different regions. I named 6 random regions. You look at them and you measure these values. These are the number of molecules in these regions. And you have its DNA profile. You have 2 values because we always have 2 chromosomes for the same regions. All chromosomes go by pair. So you have the DNA profiling of the criminal. But if you have only this, you can't do anything. You need to compare to a database or to some suspects. And if you have suspects, I take an old example of suspects. So this is Saddam Hussein and George Bush, the father. And it was said that Saddam Hussein was captured by the FBI and identified by DNA profiling. If you look at this, let's say, blood sample, it matches perfectly the Saint's profile, but it doesn't match Bush profile. So you can say that the criminal in this case is Saddam Hussein, only in this case. But anyway, this shows how it's working. One day somebody asked me if I had the real numbers. No, I made it up. I do not have access to the FBI database, and I'm happy with it. So what I do is, and what many colleagues do, is identifying grapes. For example, somebody sends me a small leaf of an unknown grape or unidentified. I do the same DNA analysis. You have many numbers. Then I can check in my database and I can see that it corresponds to Pinot 100% and not to Syrah and many others, for example. So as a rule, we analyze 6 to 8. Well, I usually do 12 DNA regions to be statistically completely sure that the sample that I got was exactly, let's say in this case, Pinot and not something else. So that's how it's working. And the larger is the database, the higher are the chances to identify it. For the moment, I have my own database. I've been working in this subject since more than 20 years. So I have gathered everything that my colleagues have published and everything that I've done myself. I put all together. So I have a huge database with a lot of wild grapes, grapes from Italy, France, Greece, the Alps, Spain, etc., etc. So if you want to identify something, the chances are high that it is in my database. There are other databases in the world. One important one in Montpellier at the INRA, in Geilwallerhof in Germany, in Klosterneuburg in Austria, and so on. So it's always interesting to compare different databases among scientists. What we can do as well with the DNA profiling is the paternity test. It works the same with grapes as with humans. Remember, chromosomes all go by pair, and one of the chromosome you get from your mother and the other one you get from your father. So you can reconstruct the composition of your father and mother's DNA based on your DNA. You can reconstruct it. Human example, I take the example of Diego Jr. His mother, we don't know her name, I think it's Christina, but usually the mother is not the question mark. The father is questionable. The mother, in this case at least, we know. So we see that the mother gave to Diego the 182 value. The 174 value must come from the father. Here the mother could only give the value 212, 216 must come from the father, etc., etc. So you can reconstruct half of the father's DNA, and then you go and seek in the database. And when you have suspects, it's even easier. Here's the case, maybe some of you remember Maradona was playing with Napoli, playing soccer with Napoli in the 80s. I think in 1987, they won the championship, the Scudetto, and he was considered as half a god in Napoli, still today, I think. And here you see, just to show you an example, Careca was playing with him in the same team. So you see that the 174 was given by the father, and both have it. So one DNA region is not enough, could be random chance. So 216, it has it, the other one doesn't, etc., etc. You can exclude Careca and all the other ones, and then after usually 30 to 50 DNA regions, you can say this one is the biological father. The same goes for the grapes. Here you have Riesling. Every number here comes from the mother and the father. You can check. It could not come from Barbera, for example. You could exclude it. So again, you can say Riesling is indeed a crossing between Riesling and Silvaner, and the name is helping to guess it. So now we go to Blaufränkisch after this short introduction. First, its worldwide distribution, and then history and origin. So Blaufränkisch, where is its history and origin? Is it Austria or Slovenia? We'll see at the end of the presentation. The total surface in 2016 was a little bit more than 17,000 hectares in the world. Its etymology comes probably from the Franks. Blaufränkisch means the blue of the Franks. And its first mention under this name, Blaufränkisch, appeared in 1862 in Vienna, and in 1875, this Blaufränkisch name was officially adopted by a Congress of Amperoleography. It doesn't mean that it was not mentioned earlier under some of its synonyms, because this grape was widespread in many different regions. For example, under the name Kekszfrankos in Hungary, of course, Blaufränkisch in Austria, Frankovka Modra in Bulgaria, Lemberger or Limberger in Germany, also a little bit in France, Frankovka, and also Orna Frankovka in Dalmatia. So many of these names have the same origin of Franks, we will see later. And if you look at the Bering area that was published in this excellent book by Kim Anderson and Signe Nelgen, it's free, available for free online if you're interested. Just Google it, which wine grapes varieties are grown where, and you can download the PDF for free. You have a lot of statistical information in this book. And if we look at Blaufränkisch, we see that the country with the largest area is Hungary, which with 42 of the world distribution, then Austria, then Germany, Slovakia, etc., even in Peru, very surprising, in Italy, Franconia Nera, Canada, in Switzerland, where I live, we have enough grape varieties, but we are always interested in planting more. In the United States, I have had the chance last year to do a tasting of Blaufränkisch wines from New Jersey, very interesting style, completely different from what we know in Austria. There are at least 2 producers in Australia who have planted it. I've heard that some have planted in Japan as well. And I was in Andalusia in Spain last week, and on wine list I saw also a Lemberger, so Blaufränkisch from Andalusia. I didn't try it, but you see that it's traveling a lot, and it's there is a growing interest in this variety around the world. Blaufränkisch was used to breed varieties, probably that you all know, that Zweigelt, named after the professor who did the crossing. Zweigelt is a deliberate crossing, so obtained by human hands in a research center between Saint Laurent and Blaufränkisch. And on the other side, Blaufränkisch was artificially crossed with Blaue Portugiese to produce Blauburger and Herold Rebe. There are a few more varieties, but they are not of great importance in commercial cultivation. So now we go to the history and origin of Blaufränkisch. There are many stories, like for many old varieties, we can always read romantic stories about the origin without scientific evidence. For example, it is said that Duke Karl from Lorraine in France would have brought Fränkische, hence its name, Fränkisch, in Eichberger Ried at Gumpolskirchen in eastern Austria. This was published by Burger in 1837, but it has no scientific background. Does it come from Franconia, the wine region in Germany? Well, many synonyms, Blaufränkisch and many of its synonyms have Frank something in the name. So it would make sense to have an origin from Franconia, but still this was speculation. Does it come from Ukraine? Well, Lemberger is the name of Lviv in today's Ukraine, which was in the eastern part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. There is no reason for it to be named after Lviv. There is no reason to have a Ukrainian origin, because this name probably comes from Lemberg in Styria, in Lower Styria, or Limburg-Massau in Niederösterreich, Lower Austria. So this makes more sense, but we cannot help people having speculations about the origin of grapes based on names and imagination. So the parentage study by DNA profiling is what is helping us to better understand the origin of a grape, and also the transmission of, for example, resistance genes or interesting genes from one father to the child plant. In this example, already in 2004, Jean-Michel Boursicot from Montpellier at the INRA discovered that Blaufränkisch was one of the many children of Gouais Blanc. And the other parent, this question mark, was unknown at that time. So what is this Gouais Blanc, first of all? Who knows? A few years ago, almost nobody knew about it. And I like to say that if we did not have Gouais Blanc at the beginning, we would not be able to drink Montrachet by Romanée Conti every day for lunch, like I'm sure everyone does. I have it here, no. So these are the synonyms of Gouais Blanc. This variety used to be widespread all over Western Europe in the Middle Ages under a large quantity of synonyms. For example, of course, Gouais or Gouais in German-speaking Switzerland, Prévéral in Piedmont, Heunisch, it is the main synonym, in the German-speaking regions, Foirard, Gauche, what else, Belina Drobna. We have many different names, which means that it was widespread and important. And this variety is so important that it was shown in 1999 by UC Davis together with the INRA in Montpellier, that this variety crossed many times with Pinot. Here we see two examples. It spontaneously crossed within the vineyards to give birth to, on one side, Gamay, on the other side, Chardonnay. So who would think that Gamay and Chardonnay have the same parents, which means they are brothers? Well, when you drink the wine, it's not obvious. Gamay has and Chardonnay have a morphology that is very similar to Pinot, but no one had ever thought about Gouais Blanc as the second parent. So going further, they found, my colleagues, they found at least 21 brothers and sisters that are the natural offspring of Pinot and Gouais Blanc. Not only Gamay and Chardonnay, but also Aligoté, Melon, Melon de Bourgogne, and Romorantin. The other one, or Kniperlé in Alsace, is also a little bit planted. The other ones are not so widespread, and they are some obscure varieties, but it shows how important has been Gouais Blanc in the development of Western European grape varieties. That's why we call it the Casanova of grape varieties. If you have a picture of Casanova, because we have found children of Gouais Blanc almost everywhere. Natural, spontaneous offspring, children of Gouais Blanc. In red are the most important. We have Folle Blanche, responsible for many of Armagnac wines, Jacquer in Savoie, Elbling, Riesling in Germany, Blaufränkisch, as we know, Furmint in Hungary, etc., etc. So it's a very important variety, although its wines are not so much appreciated, because we think that in the Middle Ages we had two big groups of wines and big groups of grapes. The wine of the Franks, that were named in German the Fränkisch. This is Pinot and all its family, the real family of Pinot. These are noble wines, and the wines for the Huns, so the barbarians, Hunnisch, that were mostly made of Gouais. So these are the two big quality cluster that we can make. Indeed, the wines of Gouais Blanc are not really exciting, especially if you don't lower the yields, if you don't cut the clusters and lower the yields. You have wines with they are white wines with very high acidity. And I know a few producers making a good job, but it's not so exciting. So then another unknown vine came on the subject. In 2011, Anna Crespan and colleagues in Italy found two very old vines near the border with Slovenia in northeastern Italy, close to Udine, between Udine and the border with Slovenia. And this old vine, found in 2006, was called Spulzina. It was published in 2011, but found in 2006. Spulzina was almost unknown at that time, and they conserved it in the grape collection without knowing what it was. A few years later, Andreas Jung published in 2014, but he found it in 2007 and 2009 in Rheinhessen. He found an old vine in Rheinhessen, and he looked up in ampelographic books. He called it Schwarze Zimmettraube, which was grape from Lower Styria. I put it between brackets because the name was not exact. It was later identified to Blaue Zimmettraube. And Blaue Zimmettraube, you see a picture here, is a female variety, which means it doesn't have, there are a few percentage of varieties with female flowers. It doesn't have the male part to self-pollinate. So you need to plant that kind of varieties among other varieties that have pollen in order to have pollination, in order to have berries and harvest. So this Blaue Zimmettraube was not originating from Germany, apparently. It turned out to be identical to Spolzina in Italy, and in Lower Austria, it was mentioned in the Austrian part and in Lower Styria, sorry, in the Austrian part and Slovenian part of Lower Styria. So based on that research, Erika Maul and colleagues from Geilweilerhof in Germany concluded that Blaufränkisch, being a child, a spontaneous child between Gouais Blanc, Rhenish Weiss, and this Blaue Zimmettraube from Lower Styria, was originating from Lower Styria, and it was the missing link of the origin of Blaufränkisch, and else we will see also Blaue Portugiese. This natural crossing have occurred before 1750, apparently, based on the historical research, and they were later capable of showing that on one side, this very old and bizarre Blaue Zimmettraube gave birth to Blaufränkisch with Gouais Blanc, but also to Blaue Portugiese with Silvaner or Grüner Silvaner, which makes it very interesting, showing that for them, when they have published this work in 2016, the origin of Blaufränkisch and Blaue Portugiese is Lower Styria in the today's Slovenian part. So they were able to announce that these two grape varieties, Blaufränkisch and Blaue Portugiese, most likely come from Slovenia. So that was the research published in 2016. In 2020, a work from Croatian colleagues, Zulj Mihajlovic, showed that the grape called Modra Kosovina was identical to the true Blaue Zimmettraube. And in their research, they could not confirm the parentage of this true Blaue Zimmettraube with Blaufränkisch and Blaue Portugiese. So this questions the research. Probably that Andreas Jung in Germany, when he thought he had found the true Blaue Zimmettraube, he did not have the true Blaue Zimmettraube. And so far, that's what we know. In 2022 or 23, we will have the pleasure of reading a recent research done by the Klosterneuburg Research Center, where they apparently will show that the true Blaue Zimmettraube is Austrian. And so Blaufränkisch and Blaue Portugiese are Austrian as well. This is not yet published. I have not seen the details, and I'm very much looking forward to be able to read all the details. I hope with all the DNA profiling studies and all the historical information. So this is not published yet. It's brand new information. So I finish my talk here, and I would be very much interested in knowing what Mr. Friedberger has to tell us about this new research that is not published yet. So I'm closing the presentation now. And if Johannes Friedberger would be okay to take the word, I would be happy to hand him the microphone.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Very good.
Okay, yes. Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Yes. And I'm a little bit surprised because in the day to a few lessons, a few hours before, I have written to Mr. José, what's the name of José? Is the
Vouillamoz. Vouillamoz is a bit difficult.
Vouillamoz. Okay, I can't explain this.
It's okay.
Okay, yes. And now I sent him the last research of Klosterneuburg, yes. And this is interesting, yes, because the Dr. Regner of our institute and Mr. Mann, he is a historian interested men, they found out that the name of Spulzina, also the first, the grape of the crossing was found at the name Spulzina. And the German, Mr. Jung, says that the name is the historical grape variety of Blaue Zimmettraube. We have seen, yes. And now the Croatian study says that the Blaue Zimmettraube is they found it in Croatia, and it is called Modra Kosovina. Yes. And now we have the problem. There's the Blaue Zimmettraube. Seems to be not the right historical name of the crossing as the mother of Blaufränkisch and Blaue Portugieser. And now we are searching for the right name of the mother. And it's not so easy, yes. And yes, in the moment, it seems to be that it's not from Slovenia. And Dr. Regner and Mr. Mann cannot find the right historical name of this variety, but it seems to be, it is really a crossing from Austria. And I will publish this work in a few months in the Austrian journal. It's called Der Winzer, and then you can find it. Now I don't want to explain the whole work, because it's a really great work about the crossings, but why it is what happened, because Jung said it is the mother variety was Blaue Zimmettraube, and it's this goes back to an historical emperor Greif. He was called Franz Xaver Trummer. Trummer was an emperor Greif from Styria, and he said that the Blaue Zimmettraube seems really is really like to Blaue Portugieser, and this is because and he also says that Blaue Portugieser, also Trummer says in the 19th century that Blaue Portugieser is a grape variety who is living in Slovenia since is an old variety, and there are grape vines which are very old. This says Trummer, and this is the because of this letters. It seems that the crossing also comes when Blaue Portugieser must be, when he says Blaue Portugieser is an old variety of Slovenia, then it seems that the crossing also be in Slovenia. But now we can see that Blaue Portugieser wasn't an old grape variety of Slovenia. Franz Xaver Trummer, it should to be that he makes a mistake. Trummer says there are older grapes of vines of Blaue Portugieser, but it seems that was in Slovenia two different Blaue Portugieser varieties. The one Blaue Portugieser we know, this is the Blaue Portugieser of today. It is the early blue Blaue Portugieser. And in the history, there was called a second grape variety in Slovenia. This is also called Portugieser, but it's called late blue Portugieser. And Trummer takes both varieties and says they are from Slovenia, and so this is the ground. This is the real mistake, and so Jung, Mr. Jung from Germany, he says that Blaue Portugieser is an old variety of Slovenia, and so the crossing of Blaufränkisch is a half sister of Blaue Portugieser, takes also place in Slovenia, and so this seems to be not right. and maybe the real crossing comes in Austria. My opinion is that the real name, historical real name of the crossing is Schlehenschwarze. Maybe it's Schlehenschwarze, and in Styria the Spulzina seems to be a grape variety of the group of Grahentraube. Grahentraube. In Slovenia or Croatia, they are called Vrannik. Vrannik, a group of Vrannik, yes.
Okay, thank you very much for these new insights on what will be published. I'm very excited to see the paper out, and I will read it with much interest. I hope to have all the details about history. It's always tricky to give the origin of a grape in a country, because most of the time the grapes are older than the political borders. But what is interesting is to identify the birthplace in terms of where do we observe the longest history and also the highest biodiversity within the grape variety. And I'm sure that the biodiversity of Blaufränkisch is in today's Austria and not in Slovenia, that's for sure. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I'm really looking forward to reading the article.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And now we have some time. If someone else would like to ask some question to José, is there anyone? Just unmute your microphone and ask your question, please.
May I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So you showed us that the Blaufränkisch grows in a lot of different countries. Is it the same Blaufränkisch, and is the difference of the taste, comes it then from the terroir, or has this variety developed in different directions? If it, example, the Hungarian Blaufränkisch, I think it tastes different from the Austrian, but why? Because of the grape, or because of the land, the terroir, or the technique of the winemaker, the climate, whatever?
Yeah, so the terroir, of course, obviously plays a role for any grape variety, but what is also very important is the group of clones, what we call a biotype that you are planting. And I can easily imagine that Kekfrankos, for example, in Hungary, has been introduced in Hungary many years, many centuries ago, and it has developed through mutations, as I was showing in the first diagram. Mutations have accumulated in Hungary in the Kekfrankos type that are not the same as the ones that have accumulated in the Blaufränkisch type in Austria. So after centuries of separation, these accumulations of mutations create different types within the same grape variety. So that's what we call a biotype. And I can easily imagine that the biotype of Hungary is genetically slightly different from the biotype in Austria, while remaining in the same grape variety, because we don't go through sexual reproduction for a new generation and a new variety. So to me, these differences between Hungarian Kekfrankos and Blaufränkisch come from the genetic subtle differences. But if you take the example of New Jersey that I was tasting last year, they have introduced very recently Blaufränkisch in their region, and we cannot imagine that it had enough time and quantities to accumulate mutations. And here it's clearly the terroir that is speaking.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have one question. And the grape, the mother, the Zimmer grape, the Zimmettraube, I'm not sure if I understood. Does it belong to the Vitis vinifera grapes, or is it a noble grape?
So yes, it does belong to Vitis vinifera. Yes, absolutely. As far as I understand, the new research that has been done at Klosterneuburg, the parentage was correct, what was published by Erika Maul at Galwalhof, but the name was not correct. Blaue Zimmettraube, the one name that they used, was not correct, and they considered it to be from Slovenia, but it's apparently not. So the DNA was correct, but the name was not correct. And they are looking for the real old name of this genotype, this guy in Austria, as far as I know today.
José, a question from my side. Are the parent grapes still existing physically in the vineyards, or is this just historic evidence?
So for Blaufränkisch, Gouais Blanc is very often scattered in old vineyards, but you have one plant here, one plant there, and most of the times it has been pulled out because of quality. And the true Blaue Zimmettraube, which should have another name, is still scattered. I read quickly, they have found some examples in old vineyards in Austria, but there is no single vineyard of this variety that is currently cultivated and that where wine is made of it. Not now, not yet.
Thank you. Any other questions? Then I would like to say thank you to your participation.